Okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome. This is the future of the restaurant industry, hosted by Aplendio. I am your host, Brian. I am the business development specialist here over at Aplendio. And also joining me as a co-host, silent co-host, is Viola. She is our marketing manager. Um, just to let you guys know, you guys are on mute for now. This is just so our speakers and the host, myself, could participate in the conversation. And don't worry, you guys will have a chance to participate at the end in our Q&A. So let's get started. So we are at Blandio. We are a software house that specializes in creating custom mobile and web solutions tailored to our clients' specific business needs. So again, the theme of this webinar is the future of the restaurant industry. And again, we have three very special guests who I will be introducing shortly. We have Jamie Richardson, VP of Marketing and Public Relations at White Castle. Mike Smits, Chief Operating Officer of Taziki's Mediterranean Cafe. And Liz Bazner, Director of Digital at A&W Restaurants. I will briefly go through our agenda. So we will have our speakers briefly introduce themselves, talk a little about their role and their brand. Then we will jump into our discussion, which we've split up into three separate blocks: the current situation of the restaurant industry, the use of technology, and their forecast for the future. Then we will be concluding with the Q&A session and closing statements. So again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to get in contact with me anytime. There's my email, my phone number. I check my email about 23 hours a day. So I am always reachable and you could always get me by phone. So yeah, that's it for my presentation, and let's get started with our speakers. So let's start with Jamie. So why don't you introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm Jamie Richardson, and I'm a rookie at White Castle. I've only been here for 22 years. So we're still a family-owned business after all these years, if you can imagine that. So we have about 360 restaurants in 13 states. We also have a consumer packaged goods business. So we exist to feed the souls of craver generations everywhere. We think of that as our vision, and our mission is to create memorable moments every day. So along the way, we get to have a lot of fun, we think, because we don't take ourselves too seriously. We have about 10,000 team members. What's really cool is of those 10,000 team members, more than 1 in 4 has been with White Castle 10 years or more. So we really focus on what we can do to create a great place to be, great place to work, and hopefully with a heart for hospitality. And I'm our Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations. And prior to that, I was in the role of Vice President of Corporate Relations, which is government affairs and lots of other different things. But looking forward to today's discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, hi guys. Mike Smith, Chief Operating Officer for Taziki's Mediterranean Cafe. I've been with Taziki since 2016. I started with them when we had about 40 locations or just over. Today we have 92 stores in 16 states and are still growing. We have a franchise system that occupies about 80% of our locations. So we know the feeling of both being a franchisor and an operator at the same time, and looking forward to talking about business today.
Awesome. And now last but not least, Liz, let us know about you.
My name is Liz Bazner. I'm the Director of Digital for A&W Restaurants. I've been with the brand for almost 10 years now. And we are the country's oldest franchise restaurant chain. We've been around since 1919, primarily known for our root beer, which is made fresh in all of our restaurants across the country. But also we have a line of burgers and chicken and some dessert items as well. We've got about 550 locations right now, and we are like 98% franchisee owned. So we only have 3 corporate stores. And something that's a little bit unique about A&W is that we're actually owned by our franchise association. So technically everybody at corporate works for the franchisees. So it makes all of our decision making is done by restaurant operators. And I think that that's been especially true this year.
Awesome. Great, guys. All right, so let's jump into the discussion. So we'll start with the current situation. Obviously, 2020 is unprecedented. Obviously this is everyone. You cannot avoid it. So it's so interesting to know about, like, what are the 3 things maybe you've learned most about the restaurant industry, or even your brand. So Jamie, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Brian. I think, it's learning that's ongoing. And I think at this point in time, we never speak of COVID in past tense. We feel we don't know where we're at on that timeline. We know what we're experiencing. If I had to really boil it down to its essence, I'd say 3 things we learned. I think the first is that there's no substitute for shared experience. I mentioned in my introduction the tenure that a lot of us have at White Castle. And it's been really helpful because so many of us have worked together over the years. There's great chemistry, and it made the transition from spending time in person to spending time virtually easier. I think it helped us make quicker, faster decisions because there's a trust level there that's been helpful for us. I think the second thing we've learned is authenticity counts. Back in April, in late March, we made dramatic cuts to anything that wasn't locked in that we could reduce spending wise. We did, including our marketing budget. We cut it dramatically. And so the temptation was to focus every single message on translating it to a sale. Instead, we pivoted towards what can we do to help our community. So we provided a free combo meal to any healthcare worker who came through one of our drive-thrus and showed an ID. That's all that we required. And we gave away over $1 million in combo meals. That was unexpected. We didn't expect that kind of response, but it was worth every penny because we know that it mattered to them and it mattered to our communities. And I think the third is that through all of this, the thing that's a constant for everybody in the restaurant world is a heart for hospitality really counts and matters, and that it powers us through. It's the fuel that I think allows us to look at tough situations and problems and come up with new solutions. And that's the heart of who we are as restaurateurs. I think that there's always a way to put the study to it and figure it out. These challenges are unlike any we've ever faced, I think, for so many of us. But you see the success stories and it's heartening. So I guess to wrap up, the 3 things for us: no substitute for shared experience, authenticity counts, and then the third would be a heart for hospitality still matters no matter what we're facing.
Awesome. And Jamie, like, as someone who's with a marketing background and expertise like you, like taking a cut out of the marketing budget, how does that feel? Is it like, do you take it personally, or do just with the times, think you just have to adjust?
Oh, that's a tough question, man. I know you're recording, but yes, it hurt my soul for a moment or two. But it's also the realization, I think, being family owned. So we're kind of the opposite of franchise. We have 99% of our 360 locations are company owned. But I think it gives us permission to take the long view. We're privately held, not publicly traded. So we can take the long view. And so if it means reducing now so we can get through a tough time, we're all in. And that's been the attitude of everyone throughout the whole enterprise. So, but yeah, it hurts. You have to make tough decisions, but we'll live to fight another day.
Sure. And Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, my 3 are the first is it's important to be nimble. Like, we don't always know what's coming at us from a legislative or from a supply chain standpoint. And just creating a culture where our staff is ready to go and ready to accept the challenge and to be nimble and change. There's been so much change this year, and to create a culture that embraces that rather than a culture that fears that is just been incredibly important to us. I think the next thing touches on what was just said, and it's really about, like, our relationship with our guests pre-pandemic was just quintessential, right? So I think the restaurants that had strong relationships with their guests were the first restaurants that the guests started coming back to. So our guests know that they can trust us. They know that we're going to put their safety first, and we will figure out a way to get them the right food in a quick amount of time and make sure it's safely delivered to them. And I think, lastly, it comes down to operations for me always as being an operator. And I think there's a good lesson in we just can't wait to run efficient restaurants. We can't say, hey, we're going to figure this out later, or this problem's not worth the effort. And we have to be constantly diving into, can we tighten the labor model without affecting the guest experience? Can we provide a better value to our guests? Is there something else? So For us, that's the three things. It's be nimble, maintain the relationship with the guests, and then continue to focus on running efficient restaurants.
Right. And Mike, when you talk about this nimble, like it sounds like you guys are like a startup. Over at us, we're a software house, so we agile methodology, all that stuff. So the way you're describing it is very interesting. Like, of course, you have to be able to adapt, right? And if you have processes in place and stuff like this where you can't, then how are you going to be able to adapt to any new situation, especially COVID, like something
Sure.
so unexpected, right?
Yeah, so we had a small team of franchise consultants that were there to support our franchisees. And when travel gets shut down, what other ways can those people contribute to the business? So a lot of them became important parts of getting our online ordering up to speed, or to loading third-party ordering into the restaurants. And it's just, that's the nimbleness of, hey, how can I help? Where can I step up? That's helped us get through this.
Great. And how about you, Liz?
It's hard to go last after all that great info. I think if I had to talk about three things, that the first thing I would talk about is really communication. For us, in late March, early April, we had basically been doing live webinars 5 days a week. Our CEO was hosting them, and he was talking to our franchisees and talking to our corporate staff as well. But I think the thing that we said the most often was, I don't know what's happening with PPP loans. I don't know what's happening with the supply chain. I don't know. But all of the follow-up to that was, we're going to find out for you, and we'll be open and transparent as well. So now we're down to one webinar a month, which is a nice break from 5 days a week. But I have the cell phone numbers now of franchise partners that I probably would not have communicated with them in that way in the past. And we just got used to texting each other and keeping each other up to date. We've got a ton of different group chats that are going on. So although, the circumstances were unfortunate, it's kind of nice to have that level of communication now ongoing. I was also reminded, and I've worked in the restaurant industry since I was like 13 years in some way or another. Restaurant people are really hard workers. They're used to working in their stores. They're used to working, at the grill or in the drive-through. And so we saw from our franchise community, really the first thing they wanted to do was they wanted to serve their communities. They wanted to protect their staff. And we had people who were working around the clock. And so that was just a really nice reminder of why I love the restaurant industry. It's full of people who are really entrepreneurial. And I think that's probably the last thing that I'd say was, it was really, really cool to see the ingenuity of some of our operators who were creating like makeshift double drive-throughs, or like turning their parking lots into like old school drive-in stalls, knowing that their dining rooms were closed and probably would be closed for the foreseeable future. I mean, it was like over a weekend, we had people who were sending us ideas of how you can make your drive-through more efficient. With cones and little makeshift sort of lemonade stand looking things to be able to take orders from their guests. And we took a lot of those and sort of had our design team help tweak them so that we could then roll them out to the rest of the system. So it was really, really cool to see people who just rallied and knew that they wanted to keep serving their communities, keep their restaurants open, keep their staff protected. And some of the creativity that came out of that was really neat to see.
That's great. Like Liz, like that's how the market provides, right? The market finds a solution, right? So like whenever, especially something as unexpected as COVID happens, right? It doesn't take a week, 2 weeks max for franchisees to find a solution to serve their customers, no?
Yeah, and I can be the kind of person who talks myself into like analysis paralysis, where like, we got to look at it, we got to study it, we got to figure out every possible scenario. And so it was kind of neat to be involved with a bunch of operators who said, well, we're going to do this tonight. So if you have any feedback, that'd be great. But if not, like, this is going to be in place in our restaurant tomorrow. We'll let you know if it worked and if it didn't. But yeah, the pace at which everything has moved this year has been just insane.
Yeah, and like to piggyback on what you said, there's like the next question, like so how is the process from transitioning from like a traditional restaurant setting to like curbside or just takeout only? Like how, like there, because you guys have franchisees all over the United States, all over the world, some places. Like, so how is the process internally? How does that go?
Well, for us, we're very fortunate that most of our restaurants have drive-throughs. And so that's really been a saving grace. And now a lot of them have double drive-throughs, and we're looking at triple drive-throughs and how much we increase really the flow of our consumers through that medium. For us, to be totally honest, we did not really have an off-premise solution. We had talked about delivery. We had some restaurants that were doing online ordering. There really wasn't a lot of appetite for it until about the last week of March this year. And so we had put all of our media on lockdown. We put all of our spending on lockdown in late March, early April, and really put together a task force that was in charge of looking at delivery, curbside, off-premise, takeout, anything that we could do. So we took a project that under normal circumstances probably would have taken 6 to 9 months and tried to roll it out in 2 weeks. And I was really impressed with how far the team was able to go. But that's probably the biggest change to our business this year is, delivery kind of went from being a 4-letter word to something that was like very necessary just to keep food moving to consumers.
And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, for some of our restaurants, it was just second nature. We were ready to go. We were working on these projects. We certainly it accelerated. And some other restaurants, we learned a lot. I mean, we have about a dozen drive-throughs out of 90 restaurants. And so those restaurants thrived immediately. We learned a lot about our future prototypes and what we're going to ask landlords for, how many dedicated parking spots, what our signage requirements would be in those parking spots. We also know that, going forward, we're going to look at smaller footprints. We think that just generally speaking that this is going to lead to a trend. So I think it's created a lot of thought about future projects, and some people hit this thing in stride and they never missed a beat. And for other operators who were less nimble, they struggled a little bit more.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because it's like every restaurant kind of is like their own laboratory of experiment, really, right? So, we're especially during this time, you're trying to see what works. Some things might not work, and so do you think that there are some restaurants that succeeded more than others, and what do you attribute that to? Is it the nimbleness of certain franchisees?
Yeah, I think some of it's just operational efficiency in their people. I know Jamie said it earlier, and having trained staff that cares about the brand and the business, there's just no substitute for that. So that was a big part of it. I know we had to adopt a lot of projects and processes that we never dreamed we would be doing. So we were selling essentially CSA boxes by partnering with FreshPoint and selling produce to people who couldn't get it at grocery stores. We turned some of our restaurants into grocery stores, and we're selling products that we got from our other vendors and partners direct to consumer. I'd never envisioned in my career that we would be, selling raw proteins because people couldn't get them in the grocery stores. But many markets said, hey, bring it on, let's go, let's make a difference. And I think that really helped create relationships with our communities for those markets that did that. And, some locations felt like that was too much work or it wasn't the right move. And I don't think that they got the depth of connection to their communities.
Yeah, that's great. And Jamie, how about you? For me, one of the most appetizing things about White Castle is opening that door and just getting bombarded by that slider smell. So for people who, I'm sure there's many like me, so how do people transition? How is the transition from, you can't eat in the restaurant to, okay, you could go through the drive-through, maybe order through Uber Eats. So how is that transition?
Well, first, let me say, Brian, when dine-in reopens, we've got your corner booth reserved for you. So we got
for sure.
I would touch on something Liz mentioned. Communication was like a big focus. We're fortunate. We created our own team member app that we did in-house about 18 months ago, and 95% of our hourly team members have it. So we were able to get messages to them early on and throughout, and continue to. But especially the really empowering part of that has been, I think we're all facing this, the labor challenges are real in terms of not just because of COVID, but because of scarcity of help. So one of the things we face, we've got great longevity, we still have churn. And so trying to fill those hourly roles has been really a bigger challenge than we typically have. And so What we do have on that app is people can trade shifts. So, and they can go from one castle to another. Everyone can look if they have something they need a shift covered, they can put it out there and someone can cover it for them. So we're not requiring the general manager sign off on it. It all gets kind of recorded and handled. So that like free moving exchange of scheduling, we had it in place before COVID. We were really thankful we had it in place during COVID. And then the other thing I think leadership wise, our CEO, Lisa Ingram, is the great granddaughter of our founder. She really embraces our value of humble family. She was constantly, just as much as A&W was doing, there were constant updates, but it was going out to every team member. So people knew when we had to make tough decisions, we shared what those tough decisions were and why we did it and what our hope was. So we had 150 leaders in the company literally take a 20 to 40% pay cut with no end in sight, with the idea that if we were able to do that, we would avoid layoffs. And so the idea was let's maintain that employment as close to 10,000 people as we can. We did have to furlough. I think it was less than 30 people were furloughed because their roles there was no way to really, but each one of those individuals was given the chance to work in a castle at one of our manufacturing plants. So, I think those kinds of adjustments were real. When it comes right down to the castle level and operationally, scheduling was a big one, but it was also just thinking through how do we connect with customers if we're all about memorable moments, and to your point, you're not getting that walk into the dining room. What can we do to enhance the drive-through experience? So we're fortunate as well in that we have drive-throughs at almost all of our locations. So it's been a grind. Transactions versus prior year remain soft. But we've been clawing back day by day to get back to where we want to be. And, we always end with an ellipsis because we're restaurateurs. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so optimistic.
Yeah. And, it's just it's a different vibe, right? It's something that we're going to have to adjust to, right? Like it's the new normal, right? So like we said, Mike, even before we even hopped onto this conversation, some people are just not going to want to eat in the restaurant anymore. And, you're going to have to find ways to cater to that customer in a way maybe that you weren't before. So, this also brings up another interesting point about maybe COVID regulations throughout different regions. Like all of you guys are restaurateurs in companies where you're all over the States. Every county, every city may have their own regulations. So how do you deal with that? Like how frustrating is it maybe, or how much time are you taking to adjust to these new regulations? Like, I could open, I can't open. How about we start with you, Mike?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we have everything going on from no dine-in allowed at all in cities that we operate to essentially they can be full capacity as long as they're maintaining the 5-foot rule. And then that's not being locally managed by legislative powers. So we're running the full gamut with our franchise partners and what their experience is like. To Liz's point earlier, it's really been about communication. So, we try to stay in constant communication. We're available to all of our partners. If they want to reach out to us, we have suggestions, and we've made some improvements to the restaurants as far as adding plexiglass in between some of the booths and trying to create safer atmospheres for our guests and bringing the PPE equipment in. So I think, all of those things kind of combine to go, what's going on in your market? Tell us what you need, and then let's make a plan together on how we can support you. And I think that the best thing that we can do as an industry is to talk to each other and think about this with an abundance philosophy. Like, this is not a zero-sum game. Our industry needs all of us to work together to provide safe food in an efficient way so that everyone feels comfortable going out to eat so we can all grow our sales. And I think that's what's important about, webinars like this and talking to other people in the industry.
Great. And Liz, how about you?
Yeah, I totally agree. In terms of restaurants, we need to work together. And if people don't feel safe going out to eat, that's really going to affect everybody. So that needs to be first and foremost. It's really hard in terms of the regulations, because it varies not only state to state, but city to city, sometimes county to county. And certainly the sort of strictness of the regulations is all over the board. For us, the biggest message was you've got to check with your local health department. You have to stay on top of things. And so we had, our field team was all frozen in place. Normally they traveled, 90% of the time. And because they were in their home offices, they were like rolling calls all day, just calling each one of their individual restaurants and saying, hey, what's happening in your area? Are your dining rooms open? How's your drive-through doing? Do you have a double drive-through lane yet? Do you have all of the PPE equipment that you need? How's your staffing doing? And so for us, most of our restaurants are not in super urban areas. We're in smaller towns. And so I feel like restriction wise, we probably did not fall under the same scrutiny that some larger brands who are in urban areas are. We don't have any restaurants in New York City. We don't have any in LA County. And so it really was a lot of local regulations. But it's just sort of interesting to me to look because I think for a long time, sort of the industry as a whole, cleaning was something that you did not want the guests to necessarily see. You wanted them to experience something clean. But now it's not enough for us to just tell the guests that we're being safe and that people are cleaning. They want to see it. They want to see people washing their hands, wiping down every surface, changing their gloves. So to me, that was kind of an interesting thing to see because that was something that was always, needed to happen in the background, but you didn't necessarily want the guests to see you mopping or wiping anything down. And it's totally flip-flopped now.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that as like a positive, right? Where a positive outcome of COVID, where we're more sanitary, visible, oriented, where, like you said, we would rather be seen, not heard, but it's kind of the opposite. We kind of want to see it being done, right? Like, so that's also very interesting. How about you, Jamie?
I would echo some of these same sentiments. And I think for us, when it comes to trying to sort it all out, I mean, there's so much that was going on when you look at late March and April, and it's ongoing. I mean, as numbers don't go the right direction in a lot of states, I mean, we're hearing, rumblings and rumors of what might be next. And so I think for us, we're fortunate that we're part of the National Restaurant Association, also the state associations as a result. And candidly, that prevented us from each having to individually do the legwork. We could create a funnel and a dashboard that let us know what was going on where. One of the conscious decisions we've made, even though dining in has opened up in most of the places where we operate, we talked to our team members and especially the general managers, and we made a conscious decision to not reopen the dining room. So we do have carry out, so you can come into the dining room to pick up your order, but we've just decided that for now, we're going to continue to keep the dining rooms closed for dine-in based on what the team members told us around their feelings of personal safety. I would really echo the sentiment that both Mike and Liz shared in terms of especially this idea, hey, it's a hyper-competitive world. We see it all the time, right? In terms of different brands vying for market share and all these different things. We live in a hyper-collaborative industry. And to the extent we have the common foe, and that's leftovers lasting longer. People can always choose to eat in and stay home. And to the extent we're able to invite them out to come, whether it's carry out, drive through, or dine in where we're able to do it, I think that's the story for the long haul. And I love those images of cleaning, no longer being a bad thing. It's something that, no, that's good. That's what you should be doing. And so I think it elevates the standards for all of us. Right? I think in general, and Mike hit on this too, the environment's so fluid that, it's just a matter of doing your best to plug in and being nimble. I think Mike used the word nimble earlier. I think that's a great sentiment, something we can all take to heart, because I don't think we're going to be able to not be nimble moving forward. That might be a double negative. Please, can you edit that out on the recording?
Yeah, and Mike, and Jamie, I think this is a great segue because, into our next section, where you talked about where the use of technology, when you guys had this team member app, like, so you guys even had this prepared even before the crisis. So I think in terms of communication, you guys were even above what other people were able to adjust to. Like maybe you were more nimble, as Mike likes to say. So were your present tech solutions, were they prepared for crisis management? Like your mobile, I know you guys have a mobile app as well. Like were your solutions in place in time, and were they successful? Did they help you out?
I think like all things, yes and no. I mean, that when you stress test something like with as much of a dramatic event as this is it much of a dramatic event as it is. There's things where you have to fine tune, the capacity at the drive-through. We weren't ready for that, in terms of, we're 24-hour operation for the most part. And so where we see the biggest decline in guest visits is during late night, because, we were there for people morning, noon, and night, but maybe after an evening out with friends, they might come to the White Castle drive-through. There aren't evenings out with friends these days. So just trying to adjust, understand, how do you handle that lunch rush differently? That took some learning and a lot of exchanges on, well, how do we handle this on a mobile app order? But I think by and large, we've been thankful that we've leaned towards technology. We turn 100 next year. And so we're trying to race into our next 100 years, not limp across the finish line and call it a day. And with that, the last several years, we've been investing in technology we think can be helpful. We're testing a robotic fryer, at a location, named Flippy. And Flippy does an awesome job running the fryer.
Very apropos. Yes.
Yeah. Flippy's there, 24/7. So I think technology can be your friend or your foe. I think you can't become over reliant on it and lose the human touch. But in instances like this crisis, I think it's helpful to have tools that help you through it.
Great. And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, I think we were actually positioned in a good place because we had so many of our objectives and key results were driven around technology initiatives. So this just accelerated everything we were working on at a dramatic pace. When I first started kind of leading our technology platforms, and we were only doing 0.5% of our sales digitally in the end of 2015, beginning of 2016. So today, standing where we're at now, it's 30% of our sales are coming in through our native app or our web-based portal, right? So that doesn't include third-party delivery, et cetera. And that is a dramatic shift from where we were, 4 years ago. So we came into this year at just north of 10% of our sales being digital, with the dream of like, what if we doubled this and we hit 20% by the end of 2020? And then, 20% was a dream that got realized by July 1st. And we're like, oh, okay, well, what's possible now? And so I think our systems performed well. I think that the restaurant industry is going to continue to be challenged because our customers are going to compare our apps and our websites to Amazon and to Google-driven systems, and it's kind of not fair for a customer to compare the payment systems and the ease of access of a multi-billion-dollar company like Amazon to us. But I think if we embrace that as a challenge and make sure that guests are able to find us easily, and then they're able to pay the way they want to pay, I think that's all that really matters. So I think we held up well, and I think we have to continue to innovate on a daily basis and refine that process.
Great. And Liz, so were people able to order some A&W root beer floats through a mobile app, or like how was the transition between like your current tech solutions?
I think it just shortened the runway on a lot of stuff. Our franchise system tends to be a little bit conservative. Our franchisees tend to be a little bit older and perhaps not embrace technology immediately. And I think that a lot of the roadblocks that we had in place from our own system were forced to be taken out of the way, because if you want to sell food, you have to have some sort of an online solution. Our website was not built to handle that. And so we had to do kind of some patching this year, some emergency fixes that we're looking to streamline in 2021. And I think for us, really the biggest thing is it did shine a light on a lot of areas that we had not invested in. And it became very clear that we can't continue to move in that direction. So internally, we have started, looking at ways that we're not only emailing our franchisees and our team members, we're texting them. We beefed up our internal training website to be a lot more fluid, up to date, easier to access, depending on where people were. And the same thing with our restaurant operations. We're looking at how can we make our packaging better for to-go orders and for drive-through. For us, one of the unexpected things that came out of 2020 was, one of the big sort of iconic tenets that we have is our Frosty mug. And every year we factor in mug breakage. That's just something that we've dealt with. And if you don't have dining rooms open, then people aren't getting mugs. And if people are not getting mugs, then they're not breaking mugs. And if they're not breaking mugs, it turns out that at the end of the year, you will have a lot left over. So we produce a new collector mug every year. And what we have started really pushing now on our local level is root beer float. We're calling them party packs. So people can purchase 4 glass mugs. We'll put some soft serve in a 32-ounce cup and a root beer in a gallon bag. And you can take it home and you can make floats with your own family. So we're starting to examine more things like that. Even in terms of menu optimization, we've always been such a lunch heavy business, and we saw a big shift this year where people were coming in for dinner and they were coming in and they're not ordering combos, they're ordering 2 or 3 combos. So I think for us, even looking at our menu differently and the mix of things that are selling is going to be a big point moving into next year.
Yeah, and to just address to Mike and Liz, like I know Jamie talked about the team member app. Like this is something internally. Is this something that you guys have discussed as well? Like maybe this communication, this mobile app that workers could access as well.
Yeah, I mean we're testing a communication app now. My director of training has done a great job of pushing the envelope, and she's really kind of led us into that category. We do wrestle a little bit with how much communication is too much communication with our staff. And I get, what's the right word? I get a little uncomfortable sometimes when I see employees with the cell phones out and touching things. So there's a safety and sanitation piece of it. And I almost want to live in a world where they can put it away. And I know that world is gone. But it's a tough balance of how much we want to directly communicate on their personal pieces of equipment versus, hey, how do we set you up for success with a good pre-shift meeting and make our concept and our brand simple enough that you can just hit it out of the park for the guests. So I'll probably have to hit Jamie up afterwards and learn a little bit more about how he's doing that, because I'd be interested in learning more myself.
Sure, and Liz?
I think it's super cool. I think that's a really neat idea. For us, I know that our training team has really embraced like virtual training. So, much like the rest of our field team, they were grounded for a long time. We still opened some new restaurants this year, which was like mind blowing to me that was able to happen. And normally,
congratulations. Yeah, so I was like, what's going on?
But normally we'd send a huge team of people there to help them open the restaurant. And that was really diminished this year because people didn't want to get on planes, and it just seemed kind of irresponsible to do that. And so our training team was able to do like virtual boot camps and virtual A&W universities. And although at first we were not crazy about that because it just didn't seem to be as personalized, and it felt a little strange not having sort of the same training routine that we always had. What we've actually found out is that rather than hosting boot camps where people have to physically travel, maybe get a hotel room, we had much higher participation when people knew that they could just tune in for an hour or two and be able to interact directly with our training team. So it was really cool. We've got our test kitchen at our office here in Lexington, and suddenly there were all kinds of ring lights and tripods and people's phones and iPads and trying to figure out how we can really up our training videos that we can either stream live to people or send to them. So that's something that I really thought was neat, was that suddenly our training department kind of became our de facto like video team in-house as well, which I would not have expected.
Great. And, this is a theme that all three of you have touched on, like really, you guys hit it home really well, is like just the loyalty of your customer base, right? Trying to maintain that loyalty, right? Like, especially during times like these, we really see who's a crave head and, who's really, who loves my brand and like, what am I doing well? So like my other question is like, how did your existing technology, how did it help retain your customer base? Or if it didn't, how do you think it could be improved? Jamie, I guess we could start with you.
Well, I mentioned that we made dramatic cuts when COVID was at its very worst and not knowing what each day was going to hold, let alone week or month. And we made really conscious decisions about things we weren't going to cut. And one of those was a launch of, timing wise, a launch of a loyalty program. And so, but we marched ahead with it. We're really, really grateful we have, because it's allowed us to have more direct and intimate conversations with the people who love us most. And so been really pleased with the results so far, in terms of signups and other things. Obviously, there's a lot of road ahead in terms of what that could be or might be. But we find that when we're able to offer something worthwhile, like for me, I just made a giant note in my book about the root beer float party pack. I see one of those in my future. My wife and I have 5 kids. I'm going to save most of that for me. But it's how do you strike a chord and connect in a way that's unexpected, in a way that has an emotional reward? And now more than ever, I mean, we just went through a creative brief process where one of the writers put the word in, it's a warm hug. And everybody instantly felt like that ache for, something that we're more familiar with that we haven't had as much of lately. And so I think that what we do as restaurants is we bring community together and we bring people together with common experience. And so I think that's the heart of it, really. But being able to do that and using technology to do it in a friendly way is really about just a different way to share the message. In my mind, it's the same message, it's just delivered a little bit differently.
Great. And Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it in a similar way. We definitely reached out to our guests early on with promo codes and loyalty reminders to let them know we're there and try to keep everybody in our ecosystem. And that's what's really important is, having everything integrated as best as possible so that you can actually market to your loyalty members and it's not a standalone independent and it talks to your other databases is so important to where we're at. And I think that was the other piece is we had to meet guests where they were at. So we've always been a lunch dominant business and we have seen the same thing that was mentioned earlier, a lot more dinner sales than we were traditionally used to. So that created scheduling challenges of moving shifts to PM shifts. And then, we doubled down on family feasts and things that made people still realize that the best thing that we have in our worlds is a dinner table to share food around. And so it used to be a dinner table in our restaurant where, we tried to create that environment. And now that dinner table's in our people's homes. So how do we get it there? And it's family meals and it's delivery and it's all of those things.
Great. And Liz?
I think probably the biggest change in terms of just the way that we approach our loyalty and communication with consumers was we had to do a lot more segmenting than we had in the past very quickly. And a lot of that had to do with just restaurant hours, just letting people know, hey, this restaurant's open, or this one has reduced hours, or this one has extended hours. And so in the past, our approach has really been that we take care of most of the communication on behalf of our franchisees. And we are going to change that for 2021. We're looking at giving our franchisees the ability to update their own restaurant's website on our national site. Let them control their hours, let them really control what their messaging is going to be. And so I think that that's probably one of the biggest shifts. And I think not just in the restaurant industry, but I think one of the shifts, the lasting shifts that we'll see from COVID, just as a consumer, is people got really used to hearing from brands all the time, and they got used to hearing from brands, very, very frequently. And while I think that will probably not be lasting, I just think back to March and April where you got, the joke was you would get emails from a brand that you shopped at 9 years ago, letting you know what they were doing for COVID. And it was like, all right, well, I don't need to hear from everybody. But I think consumers are going to expect more from brands going forward. They're going to expect to be for messaging to be more personalized, and I think that's really going to raise the bar for everybody. And so on the one hand, it's going to be a challenge. On the other hand, I think it's exciting because we kind of have the opportunity to really affirm a lot of those relationships that we have with our most loyal consumers, and it's attracted a new kind of consumer as well. For us, we saw a lot of our restaurants have had record years, which also seems crazy, and a lot of those are new guests who did not come to to us before. And the reason that they came to us might be because we were the only restaurant in town who had a drive-through. And so we were just the option. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up going forward. Like, those people came to us for a reason, and now we have to give them a reason to come back.
Great. And, you know, in this theme of technology, I think, you know, we can't conclude without talking about food delivery, right? Like Uber Eats, something like this. I think all of your restaurants, maybe not all of your restaurants, but I've seen some of your restaurants are on Uber Eats. So I'm like, so for people, you know, and Jamie, like when White Castle announced their partnership with Uber Eats, it was very creative. You know, Harold and Kumar don't go to White Castle, they get it delivered. So, so that's a very unique, great take on it. So I'm just like, so where do you guys see the future of food delivery in that way? Do you guys see maybe you guys having your own internal delivery system, or do you see yourself further expanding with Uber Eats or third parties, or do you think this is something that you guys would like to handle internally? Jamie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think, you know, we'll see how it evolves. I mean, we're thankful for our delivery partners, and, you know, it's expanded our universe. And none of us anticipated what we've all been through, but it's been helpful. You know, we would love to have a lower delivery fee. You know, I think everybody's in the same boat. It's a wonderful platform. We'd love to have more access to the information, you know, in terms of who the purchasers are. So, but I think what we see is that there's a hunger for simplicity from a consumer point of view, and making it easier and more available. And so we're fortunate in that, you know, over my left shoulder is the Crave case that holds 30 sliders. And, you know, so we've got portability kind of built into our packaging and how we go to market anyway. So that's been helpful. It's interesting. There was a point where we saw across the country, and this is from information we saw from one of our partners that does a lot of research, and they shared it with us and others. So it's nothing proprietary that I'm about to share, but across the country, you saw a real spike in terms of delivery, of course, like right when the pandemic was at its very worst throughout April. By the time you got into June, July, it started to go back to more historical levels in terms of the percent of sales that were going through delivery. And one of the theories was that everyone was so stir crazy, being stuck inside, that there was a race to say, I'll go get it. You know, I'll be the first one out the door, just to do something different, to, you know, remember what day it is and get some variety into the day. So we had more hunter-gatherer behavior starting to happen. So who knows where it all sorts out. I think delivery's here to stay. Whatever form it takes will depend on the ease of use, the platforms, and who's best at it, really. I mean, it's a highly competitive world right now in the world of delivery partners.
Great. And Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we were testing self-delivery, and we have some markets and some denser areas where it makes sense for us, but in so many markets it doesn't. And furthermore, it just adds a complication to just the overall operation. You know, we touched on a little bit earlier, and that's around staffing. I think we were under the misconception of, with all the people that were hitting unemployment, that there was going to be this flux of new employees and an opportunity to top grade some staff, and it just hasn't showed up in the workforce. So I think in that way, it's hard to say, hey, listen, we want to hire these people to be specialized delivery drivers for us and be awesome at what they do. And it just hasn't worked out for us to do self-delivery. And so we do have several partnerships with third-party deliveries. Where we've landed is, and initially we were where Jamie was out of, we wouldn't do anything unless we could get some of the data back out of the third party, and then we were holding off until we just kind of couldn't anymore. And at this point, what we've realized is if we can build a brand and we can get people to recognize us and drive sales, it's okay. They just have to be profitable sales. And the levee really broke for us when third party allowed us to increase our prices on their platform. And so we do charge a premium on the third party platforms to offset that cost of delivery. And if we couldn't do that, we probably would have stayed the course and stayed away from it. So that was a crucial moment for us, of that change in their business model, for us to become better partners together. So I think as long as the consumer is willing to subsidize those programs, we'll be okay, and we'll stay in equilibrium until we have self-driving cars and we can just stick it in a box that takes it to your house. At that point, then all bets are off, and we're all back in the technology business.
And how about you, Liz?
Yeah, For us, it was very similar. Those sales have to be profitable. And for a long time, delivery for us just wasn't. Our check average historically has been around $11 or $12. And so once you factor in a delivery fee from the company that's anywhere from 20 to 30%, you're looking at it really not being worth a lot of people's time. However, once they allowed us to raise our prices similarly, it became a more attractive option. And once we started selling food, our check average on delivery platforms was in the high 20s, because people were not just getting a meal for themselves, they were getting a meal for their family or for leftovers or for, multiple meals. But I think in terms of the delivery companies, because delivery has been something I think restaurants have struggled with for many years now. Up until this year, delivery companies in my mind were data companies. They weren't really restaurant companies. And I think they have been forced to pivot a little bit as well, because we have seen our partners become a little more free with sharing data. And I think being more mindful that although the end consumer is the person who's ordering from their app, we're as restaurant companies, they also need us, because they have to have something to sell, and we all want them, to be delivering a quality product. One of the things that I'm excited to see, because we really didn't have any restaurants who were doing delivery in the winter last year, is what the change will be with inclement weather. We have a lot of restaurants that are in very cold places. And when it's cold, I know that certainly I am much less likely to leave the house. And so I think that we might get some really good learnings as the weather turns, to see that delivery is profitable, in times when we may not have had a lot of sales actually at the restaurant because people just didn't want to leave their houses. But it's funny to hear Jamie talk about going back to more of a hunter-gatherer thing, because I can remember arguing with my husband over who got to go to the post office, which we never would have done before. But I was like, no, it's my turn to leave the house. So I think we'll still see some of that.
Great. I think that's a great segue into the future, right? So winter is coming, Game of Thrones fans out there. So, one of them, obviously we're talking about a global pandemic. It's a tragedy, right? But in terms of do you see any positive changes due to COVID, changes that will last? We talked about sanitation, we brought that up. But do you think there are any other changes that you think that, due to COVID, that the restaurant industry is going to be better off in the future? Liz, I think start.
I think it's really forced us to get back to basics and really focus on what the most important things are for both our teams and our consumers. So there's probably some projects that we may have embarked on that we have now realized are not as important. And so I think it gave us an opportunity to refocus. And I think as a brand, the restaurants that have made it through are hopefully going to come out stronger. But I think that for us, like I had said earlier, I pointed out a lot of areas that we have not focused in, technology being one of them, that we really cannot afford to drag our feet on anymore. So I'm excited. I'm hoping that just for everybody's sake, that we do get into a period of some more normalcy, and that people can emerge from the other side of this in a healthier manner. But it's an opportunity to level set going forward. And so I think the brands that come out of it will have figured out what really makes them lasting, and we'll figure out what's important.
Yeah, how about you, Mike?
Yeah, I would piggyback off what Liz said, and I think we definitely have refined our menu in a lot of locations. And I think that one thing a lot of restaurateurs out there are trying to make the decision on is how tight can they run their menus and their labor, and what's the best thing. So for us, we just met with our franchise advisory council this week, and we spent 2/3 of the time just talking about menu and about labor models and the best way to execute those. And I really think that is the best thing that we can do sometimes is know what you have, keep it tight, keep it consistent, and deliver based on the experience. I think that a lot of restaurants were trying to be everything to everyone. And I think we learned that is just not a profitable way to go. And I think that it's also there's some learning moments out there in the restaurant industry of how important it is to be well capitalized and prepared for when things go wrong in the future, and not just spending every dollar that you make chasing random initiatives.
Great. And Jamie, how about you?
Well, Brian, I know you start off saying with this question saying winter is coming. I think it's been here since March 13th. Feels like we're making our way through.
Winter.
Yeah, not to be apocalyptic, but I would share the sentiments that Liz and Mike expressed. I think those are good points. I think the other thing is that one of the things that I think could happen is that there's a zone of tolerance that's bigger right now because everyone kind of recognizes what different teams are going through, and it's tough. And I think coming out of this, I think there's going to be an ache for new product and new flavors and new tastes because, right now, everyone enjoys our food, but there's a certain kind of range in terms of utility around it too, because you're trying to feed a lot of people affordably and do other things. And I think one of the things that is sad for our industry, and Liz referenced it, is not everybody's going to make it through. And, so it's a less competitive landscape in one way. It's a less fulfilling landscape in another, because the mom and pops, the folks that people have as part of their range of restaurants they go to, there's still going to be that hunger for what's new and what's next. And so those of us who have a different operating model are every bit as valuable and important. But I think we need to just keep that in mind in terms of the landscape changes, in terms of our customers don't come just to us. They enjoy great Greek food. They enjoy a great root beer float, and just being mindful of that and being able to be there for all of them as time goes forward, I think is going to be important.
Agreed. And to piggyback on some of the things that you guys brought up before, I know, Mike, one of your great successes at Taziki's is your loyalty program. And Jamie, you also brought that up this year. You guys just launched your loyalty program. So how were your expectations for your loyalty program this year? And where do you guys see it going in 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so good question. I think, we launched ours the middle of, the end of 2018. And so we had a full year worth of data in most locations in 2019. And so in 2020, this was our first year really budgeting that as a line item in our P&L. And we've had some locations whose loyalty redemptions were 2.5 or 3 times what we expected. So on one hand, we're incredibly excited that our guests love us that much that they're doubling and tripling down on their frequency with us. And so that blew away some of our estimates. At the same time, it forces us to look at our profit and loss statement and go, hey, did we construct this loyalty program in the best way to be a profitable business and not, over discount? So it's a good relationship for the guests where they're getting value for their loyalty, and that we're still running a profitable business. And so my advice to anybody out there thinking about that is, man, just check your math many, many, many times over, and then make sure that you understand that once those sales start coming in, that you can feel good about them, because that's really what's helped us kind of stay the course and not see that as a cost, and appreciate our guests who have enrolled and continue to communicate with us. And lastly, that's the piece that is most important, is those guests that signed up and have that relationship with us, they let us know when it doesn't go right. And so you need to have a plan for how you're going to communicate to guests if they forgot to sign in, or they want to get a redemption later on, or they forgot to add their receipt, or whatever your scenario is. Plan on the back end for that guest connection piece to make sure that they're being taken care of for their time and dedication.
And Jamie, how about you?
Yeah, I think for us, it's just about an ongoing conversation with our customers, and having, just as Mike was saying, I mean, it's something we build out over time. I think that calibration is still, we're in our infancy with it. And certainly I know, to Mike's point, we've had similar circumstances where, okay, let's dial that one down a little bit, but that's part of the learning. So I think it's the wave of the future in terms of more personalization. Liz referenced that too, in terms of people want an authentic exchange, and they don't want to see you as a corporate sign and a logo. They want to know the people behind the sign. And that's where we see the loyalty program has given us a chance to do more of that.
Great. And how about you, Liz? Does A&W have a loyalty program, or is this something that you guys have in your pipeline?
We do not have a true loyalty program. We have, you know, an email membership club where we'll send out, you know, deals and discounts. And both of those words have been things that our operators have not been crazy about this year, deals or discounts. And so there's some challenges. Just, you know, we've got a lot of different operators in our system who are not crazy about the idea of loyalty. I don't think that we are going to be able to maintain our no loyalty program for much longer. So we are in the very beginning stages of working on it. And it's just a balance of figuring out, you know, what is important to your guests versus what your operators will embrace and tolerate, because we certainly don't want to roll something out that our guests love and our operators say, absolutely, we're not participating. So that would be really worst case scenario. So we are in the beginning stages of thinking about planning one.
Great. So I guess I hope this conversation was fruitful for your feedback from Mike and Jamie. So I want to wrap up on obviously the future, right? This is what the whole webinar was about. So I would love to hear, Liz, we could start with you. So what are some of the short-term and long-term outlooks for the restaurant industry?
For the industry as a whole, I mean, I think off-premise, curbside, and that sort of efficiency is going to continue to be something that a lot of restaurants really focus on. I think using technology that makes sense for each, you know, different kind of restaurant type, and then I think really getting not only back to basics, but to some of the points that were talked about is what sort of new products and innovations make sense and will be embraced by consumers, but also profitable. We have to remember, for us especially, this is a penny profit business. And so we definitely have to keep that in mind with whatever we're investing in.
Great. And Jamie, how about you?
I think near term, what this underscores, because you know, people everywhere are going through a tough time. I think it connects us more in a way, and I think it's going to elevate the impression, the role of the restaurant team member, the worker, whether they're back of house, front of house, whatever it might be. And I think as an industry, we're going to place more value on those individuals because we're going to have to compete harder than ever to attract good people. So I think that's going to lead all of us to really focus more on culture. I think from a customer point of view, near term and long term, there's going to be a greater emphasis on personalization and understanding how to make sense of that. I think Liz's point about it has to make sense, right, in terms of how you do it with technology or whatever, but there's going to be a focus. And I think long term, I'm going to roll out a Billy Joel quote. It's still rock and roll to me, because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to great food and taste that people love. In our language, we say crave, but you're going to have to be able to provide something that's differentiated and hot and tasty and worth the trip, whether that's coming to you from a delivery driver or pneumatic tube that comes into your kitchen. So I just think it's going to still be about that sight, sound, and motion, and the sensory experience from a customer point of view.
Great. And Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I think Jamie and I must be sharing the same notes because he took a large answer there. But I'm going to take
first.
Yeah, great minds, right? So I'm going to take a little bit of a macro point of view and start with a sad story. And the sad story is, you know, we've lost somewhere between 50 and 100,000 restaurants across the U.S. To date since COVID started. And I know most estimates say that we're probably only about 50% of the way through closures that we can expect between now and the end of 2021. And so the good news here is that for those of us who are out there still working hard to maintain our relationships and our guests, there are a lot of guests who've been displaced and need new favorite places to go to. And I look at this as a once in a lifetime opportunity to build market share. And I don't think we'll ever see it again, because that's what once in a lifetime is. So I think building market share and building that connection with our guests and our staff is just of the utmost importance. And I think that for all of us, the best thing we can do is approach this with that abundance mindset and go, okay, where are these displaced customers and how do I brighten their day and share some hospitality with them and execute some good food. And if we do that, I think everybody gets stronger across the industry.
Great, guys. Okay, I think that'll wrap up the discussion part. Let's open it up for Q&A. If any of our guests will have a question, you could write it in the chat, let me know, ping me, and then we'll get you on the screen. Okay, all right. No questions? I know the panel was great, but anything, guys. I could actually bring it back to another question while we wait, if we wait for another guest. Liz, you definitely spoke about this a lot, about the evolution of the drive-through through the pandemic. So I would just love to hear about, do you think this is here to stay due to the pandemic, or is this just a new trend that restaurants are going to just have to adapt to?
Question. I mean, I think for, we've had drive-throughs for, I don't know, 60 years maybe. And so not necessarily new. One of the things that we did see this year is we have about 50 locations that are still drive-ins, where you go and you stay in your car and the food's brought out to your car. And those are typically in small towns. They're typically older restaurants, and they're not always super high volume. We had many of those restaurants have record-breaking years. And I think it was because people were just looking for something to do. Particularly families, going into a drive-in is a little bit more of an experience than just going to a drive-through. But I think, even if we get back to some sort of a normal, I think that people's habits have probably changed and people are still looking for convenience. I don't think that the delivery trend will stay probably quite as high as it is, and similar to drive-through. But I think that it's important to be mindful that the way that people have experienced our brand has changed, and that not all of that is going to go back to what it was before. So all things to explore. But I think it's really interesting to see concepts come out with, basically shipping containers with double drive-through lanes that are super small footprints. I'm excited, just as a consumer, I'm excited to see where a lot of this innovation is going to go. I think it's cool.
Great. And Jamie?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be ongoing and evolving. And I think the heart of it is going to be, what's the easiest, fastest way to enjoy hot food? And, there are barriers to that. There are physical barriers to that. Some solutions in place are more adaptive. I think there's going to be a boomerang back to enjoying a dine-in experience. This isn't forever. I mean, we made it through 1918 in the United States and moved on. And, and people will look forward to a time when they can dine in again. But in the meantime, I take to heart what Mike said in terms of, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for those of us able to power through to be able to build a stronger base and to maintain it. And not to take it for granted.
And Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that depending on how long COVID lasts, that our guests across all brands are building habits. And I think the longer this lasts, the more pent-up demand there will be to go to some casual dining and fast casual restaurants. But I also think the more ingrained they get in the habit of getting food on the run and taking it somewhere, the deeper entrenched they're going to get in that lifestyle. And so I think that for the most part, as long as America is a car culture, that piece of our business is here to stay. And I think that figuring out how to meet people halfway when you have an inline restaurant opposed to something that has those drive-through or drive-up capabilities, it's just going to be an important part of how we write leases and how we design conversations with landlords and partners and the neighbors and co-tenants that we're sitting next to, and how to think about that from a standpoint that makes it work for everybody.
Great. Okay, guys, I guess we'll wrap it up here. So Mike, we'll start with you. Any closing statements, closing remarks?
Just that I appreciate the opportunity, and it was good to chat with these guys, and it actually gave me a little bit to kind of take away and think about of what can I streamline to make the business better. And it's good to hear what's going right. And I would just encourage anybody out there that's looking at this to spend at least as much time focusing on what's going right as what the opportunities are.
Great. And Mike, did you have any plans trip to Greece this year, or what is it? Do you get a company to Greece every year? How does it work?
I'm trying to talk them into making that the initiative. We did have a customer experience plan to give away some trips to Greece this year, and we punted that to next year. So if everything works out, hopefully we're giving away some life-changing trips to our guests next year to go visit Greece.
I could tell you, Greece is life-changing. You could literally go to a different island every day, and it's just, you can't believe it's paradise. It's unbelievable. So thanks, Mike. How about you, Jamie?
I think that, just time like this reminds me we get to be part of something really special. I'm a big believer we work in the greatest industry ever, and that we get to be the chance of something. We're part of something that changes people's lives, both those people who are part of our teams and also the guests we get to interact with. And it gives me hope for the future, right? I mean, it's like these are tough times, but we're going to power through it. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. And so I'm hopeful.
Great. And Liz, how about you?
I don't know that I have anything else to add that hasn't been said. It turns out we can do really hard things. And so, I'm hopeful that this won't last. I think it is a great point to make that we need to focus just as much on what's going right as what's going wrong, because otherwise it just seems impossible. But certainly it's a tough time, not only for our industry, but for others. But we'll just have to find a way to make it through. Yeah,
agreed. And again, great discussion, guys. Thank you so much for being here. That was Liz Bazner of A&W Restaurants, Mike Smits of Taziki's Mediterranean Cafe, and Jamie Richardson of White Castle. And also thank you to the participants. So we will also be publishing this on our YouTube shortly after, and we will be sharing a link with you guys. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this, and be well. Thank you, guys.
Long live sliders.
Yeah.
Yeah.